So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't, we'd love to see where you're from in the chat. You need to change it to be to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. My name is Aviv Ben-Yosef. I'm from Hadera, Israel. It's pretty much nearby Tel Aviv. It's 9 p.m. over here right now. And I'm a tech executive consultant. I help create R&D organizations that deliver business impact rapidly. And with me is the amazing, I call her the queen of creativity, Natalie Nixon. You want to introduce yourself?
Thank you for that awesome title. I just got upgraded. Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Nixon. I am really far from Aviv right now. I'm based in Philly, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And if you have been staying abreast of all the tragic events that have been happening in my country, in the United States, then you know the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection has we've been going through a lot of trauma and a lot of problems, as many cities are. But anyway, I'm in Philadelphia. I am, as Aviv said, a creativity strategist. And what that means is I advise leaders on how to apply creativity to get to more transformative business results and value. And the way that I work, there is an absolute direct connection between applying creativity and business impact to really get to innovation. And Aviv and I, we met about a year ago, right, Aviv? Is that right?
Yeah, a year and a half in lovely Newport.
Yes, in Rhode Island, at a learning retreat, and clicked. And part of the reason we clicked is because many, many years ago, I lived in Israel. I lived in Tel Aviv, and a part of my heart is still in Israel. I had a really positive experience there, and I always enjoy meeting Israelis. So that's kind of part of our connection.
I'll let you know that Natalie essentially lived everywhere. I'm still pretty certain she is a Mossad or CIA agent.
Did you know my dream job is to be a James Bond girl? Maybe I am, who knows? Okay, back to the serious stuff. So do you want to share why we decided to do this?
Yeah, so we actually talked about the kind of things that where we both intersect in our day-to-day work. And we realized that, especially in my field where I'm working a lot with startups and tech companies, innovation is something that is part of their core, right? They have to innovate all the time, and innovation is practically it is creativity. And I always talk to my clients about how to foster it. And I knew that talking to someone like you would, from your angles and from your point of view, would probably create this very interesting discussion of how innovation and creativity comes to be in tech. So I was sure this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So we just thought it would be cool to come to you with here's how we thought we could structure the conversation. Again, we wanted to be a conversation. We each have come to you today with two examples of our own of the ways that we are seeing creativity and technology intersecting. And Aviv, I didn't say this directly, but what do you think if after each of us shares an example and asks questions, we see if there's a question from anyone in the chat? We'd love that. We want this to be interactive. We want to hear from you. Yeah. And the other reason why Aviv and I thought it would be cool to talk about this as an intersection is that I really thrive in multidisciplinary sorts of work. I love working with people who come at a problem from a totally different perspective from mine. That's how I find that I learn the most. And I have a background in anthropology and fashion. So you're going to hear that in one of my examples as we talk about creativity in tech. So that's kind of the reason why we decided to do this. So Aviv, how about you start? That way I'll get the last word.
Sure. All right. So I'll start with something. It touches a bit on the James Bond thing, actually, now that I realize it. When I work with my clients, I tell them that to bring in innovation and novelty is something that we find easier when you're working in a startup, in a tiny company where we are all sitting back to back, and there are 5 people sitting in the room. But as we grow bigger, we lose sight of the creativity. And I don't think that that's a fact of life and that we have to lose it as we grow. I think that we simply need to find the right ways to make sure we still foster innovation. And a part of it is what I call fostering tech mastery or tool mastery. And that is that in order to know what you can do, in order to come up with new ideas, you have to be aware of the entire field of operations and actions you can do with your tools, with your frameworks, with your colleagues. I'm saying tech, but not just pure tech, but everything within your work environment.
Wait, can
And
I ask a clarifying question?
sure.
So that was interesting. Just now you said, I don't mean just tech or pure tech. So how, could you like pause for a moment, just define, how do you as a tech expert and a tech consultant, how do you define technology, and what did you mean just then by pure tech?
I mean, not just things you can do on your computer, not just having mastery of whatever tool I'm using right now on the computer, right? For example, having the mastery of knowing how to let everyone here chat with each other on Zoom. I'm talking about if my work is, for example, being a manager, I need to know not just have a mastery of how I use the tools or how my team is using the tools, but also how we are using our processes. So I need to be aware of how the processes in the company work and using those to my benefit and knowing where I can cut corners and where I can. We Israelis love cutting corners. It's like a motto, and you need to
Yes.
know where you can do that. And so
Thank
you
you.
have to sure, and you have to know how to use your tools so you can know exactly where to tinker, and that means that you have to tinker. You probably won't discover all the interesting nooks and crannies in your tools simply by doing the work. You have to invest time into play. You have to find out how things work. You have to tinker and try this and that, and I think that's a crucial part of having creativity. Even if you have a deadline, you need to find the time, something I help clients do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my example is, I can't get into too many details because it is actually classified, but about 15 years ago, when I was in the Israeli army in one of the cyber units, we had to connect 2 different computers that were not allowed to have a cable going through. And we needed to send a signal from this to this one saying, go on, you can now do your thing, whatever that thing is. And connecting a cable would have required so much bureaucracy, it would have taken us weeks. This was actual real wartime. Every hour was critical, and we had to find a way. And I came up with the idea of the weirdest idea of having a keyboard, the keyboard of this computer strapped like this, and having the other one put so close so that when it ejects its CD tray, it was so old we had CD trays, the CD tray would press on the enter key just right so that this computer, when it needed to send a signal, would eject the CD tray. This one would have its enter pressed, and it would know, oh, I need to start doing my thing. And
Cool.
that is crazy, but it held its thing for a few days until we had to move on and find the next solution to do whatever we were doing. And this came out of actual pure play. It's not like I never in my work needed to know how to eject a CD, right? There's no reason to do that. I used to
Right.
do it because we pranked each other. So I made it so CDs would randomly eject in the room just so people would say, what just happened? And we used to joke about having ghosts in the room. And out of that play, we had exactly the solution for that weirdest thing we had to come up with literally under fire. So you have to tinker, you have to play to get your tech
Ah,
mastery.
I love that example. One of the reasons I like it, well, 2 reasons. One, I really like how you're honing in on the value of play, because that's something I write about, dare I say, in my new book called The Creativity Leap. And one of the chapters is all about play, because play is a method of experimentation. As you use that word, tinkering, there's
Exactly.
so much value, right, in following the breadcrumbs. So that's one thing I really like about your example. The other thing is, sometimes, especially those of us who don't work in the tech space, we kind of mystify technology, right? There's like, it seems magic and complicated, and, maybe I can't even understand it. But, technology, the basis of the word is, it's a tool. This is technology. A pen is technology, right? So I
Hmm.
really appreciate your example just points out that through tinkering, through experimentation and play, you created a solution that at its base level, it's like, it's kind of analog. It's kind of,
Exactly.
I love the simplicity of it that helped with a really complex effort.
Yeah. And that's the kind of things that I love seeing at clients. If you see them play, you know that they're going to come up with interesting things.
I need, before we end, I need to find this quote, but there's a great quote from a guy. He's a humor engineer, and he basically, I'm gonna mess it up. I'll have to, we can email everyone later. I'll email you the quote, but basically, when we're playing, it sticks, right? Because it's kinesthetic and there's like muscle memory in what we're learning. Awesome.
Exactly. Does anyone have any questions about this so far before we move on to Natalie?
Question, a thought. What does it make you think of? Anybody?
I'm seeing tumbleweeds.
Okay, well, it's okay. Later on, a question or a thought comes to you. Love it. Jana, playing makes learning durable. Yes, awesome. It does. There's a reason why we are encouraged to play as little toddlers, kindergartners. Why do we stop doing that in education? Why do we, as we're getting older and more important in what we're learning, we have to sit still. We don't move to learn as much. And I think that's a real loss. Dominique has something to say. I like the concept of play as it applies also to education. Jana, we think alike. Nice, good. And Jana, Dominique is in, where is Dominique based? Dominique, where are you based? Philly. And
Philly.
Jana is in, where is Jana? Philly. Okay. So you guys should get together. You need to have a virtual coffee. All right. Thank you for that. Yeah, our learning gets less and less kinesthetic. Oh, Becky has a question.
Management has to see play as productive. How do we do that? Oh, I
Great.
always say that we have to understand that exactly this, and actually having books like Natalie's would probably help. You have to understand that if you are always driven by deadlines and always trying to get the thing done that you have right in front of you, and you don't look to the side and don't try things, you're gonna be productive. You're gonna get your things done probably, but you are reducing the safety of having any mistakes, which means that no one is going to try anything. There's no creativity going on. You won't have any novelty happening, and that will slowly get you to deteriorate. So you have to make sure that you have some time. I'm not saying that we're going to play around and have a foosball game 5 hours a day. I'm saying that we need to have some slack time to allow for this to happen.
Yeah, that's a great question, Becky. And I disagree with you slightly, Aviv. I don't think that if we only have work, we'll be productive. I don't know that's productivity. I think we'll be finished. I think we might meet our deadline, but I don't know that we've been generative, that we have totally exceeded our expectations and exceeded our clients' expectations. And since you brought up the book, The Creativity Leap, one of the ways I define creativity in this book is that it's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And it's that wonder piece that Aviv is talking about that we don't spend enough time in. Like, I've had clients in more corporate organizations where they're literally running from meeting to meeting to meeting, right? It's heads down all the time. And to, Aviv's point, if your head's down all the time, if you don't look to the left and to the right, if you don't look up and wonder and ask very different and new questions, you can't zoom out in order to see the forest for the trees. So how do we make that more of a part of management? It's really, I know people don't like this answer, but it's really about culture change. And the reason why people don't like this answer is because culture change takes a long time. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's a shift in mindset. which leads to shifts in behaviors, which leads to culture change. And it starts with leadership. And I'm not only talking about leadership at the top of the organization. I'm also talking about emergent leaders, leaders on the front lines, leaders in the margins, leaders embedded deep within the organization who are going to get rewarded and incentivized to do differently. You can't just say, okay, guys, we want to have more time for play or for wonder. How are you going to reward people? They need to be rewarded with more time to do that. Money, right? Put our money where our mouth is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how things begin to change.
Yeah, I also teach my clients to try and celebrate just the concept of novelty. Don't just celebrate the fact that a crazy idea worked. Let's celebrate crazy ideas in general, because if we only celebrate those that work, again, we're teaching people they cannot fail.
Yeah.
So have the craziest idea of the year thing or something like that.
Yes, 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 yes. I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Thank you for the questions. Okay. Shall I share one of my examples? Okay. So an example I wanted to share comes from the world of fashion. And fashion intersects with technology in several ways. I'm going to touch on two, maybe three. One way is actually embedded deep within the fibers, right? So people don't realize that textiles, which is the fabric part of the clothing that you're wearing, the clothing is apparel, but textiles is the fabrication. And textiles is the largest manufacturing industry in the world. And it's the largest manufacturing industry in the world because textiles goes into not only fashion apparel, but also aerospace, aeronautics, engineering, and agricultural textiles and medical textiles. So all of the masks that we're now wearing, right? That's all textiles. Well, one of the earliest explorations in creativity and technology has been in fashion. For example, in sportswear, and just trying to understand how can someone go on a really long run where they're sweaty, 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 and that's this moisture. If it's a 100% cotton fabric, it's going to weigh us down, and our performance won't be as high. Well, wicking is a type of it's a way to engineer the knitting design, the knitting technology in a fabric so that literally the moisture is drawn from the skin and into a kind of a feedback loop within the fiber, and it doesn't get absorbed into the fabric. So that wicking of moisture, that property is one example that's been around for quite a long time in fashion, apparel, and technology. Now there are others. Another example I want to share is actually, it will kind of intersect with my next example, but let me hold off on it a bit. There's a lot of exploration in the fashion sector with avatars and really trying to build on gaming in order to do a couple of things to help with a need for escapism. So I'll say a need and a desire, right? There's a need, especially we're seeing as our world feels like it's crumbling around us with COVID-19, now with basically kind of the race riots that are happening in the United States to kind of avoid. But companies like Dressed, DREST, companies like Rublox, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing correctly, RUBLOX, have been exploring integrating technology into fashion for a while. And what I think is really cool about this example is they're not really exploring tech in real clothing, which was my first example. They're exploring tech in terms of the consumer experience. And they're taking another level in the following way. Dressed, DREST, is basically a fashion styling game. Now, it hasn't kind of simmered down to the mainstream fashion brands, but the really high-end fashion brands like Gucci, Burberry, Farfetch are really interested and have bought into the dress platform, where you as a player, you create an avatar and you style your avatar with different designs from these brands. So there's a couple things happening here. Number one, Dressed is basically taking advantage of being a multi-sided business model. They become kind of the Airbnb of fashion, because who are they connecting? The high-end fashion brands on the one hand, and me, a player and a consumer on the other. And here's what Gucci and Farfetch get from this. They get all sorts of consumer insight in the process. They're learning what are the designs and the styles that I'm liking. And that helps them to control their inventory in very different ways. So through the use of these avatar technologies, you have gaming happening. You're building consumer insight. You're allowing for a bit of escapism. The company Roblox, this is interesting. So how many of you have heard of an online t-shirt company? It's actually been around for almost 20 years now, maybe a little more than 20 years. It's called Threads. And many years ago, well, not so many, but years ago, I was a professor and I taught the business of fashion. And I used to love to give this example of Threads, because Threads was this crowdsourced t-shirt design company. And the reason I used to love it as an example is that they were very good at making to order instead of making to stock. The problem that now all of these retail stores that have been looted, like Foot Locker and H&M and all these stores in cities around America, they've had their inventory on the floor. And if you're staring at inventory, that's horrible, because it represents revenue that you're not getting, right? It's just stuck there on the selling floor, right? So what Threads was able to do, they would say, okay, guys, hey, crowds, you generate some ideas for t-shirt designs, and then we're going to have you guys vote on your favorite designs, and those are the t-shirts we're going to make. Like, duh, brilliant, right? Instead of making a bunch of yellow polka dot t-shirts, which may never move, you ask the people, what do you like? What are you feeling? And that's what you make. So the reason I'm giving the example of Threads is fast forward to Roblox. What they're doing is they are a user-generated content store. So it's a game, once again, and players are buying digital hats, digital jackets, digital sunglasses for the avatars of a particular brand. Now, here's what's interesting. They have a revenue share model. So the creators of these design ideas, on average, in one of the articles I read, said the creators are making on average $26,000 a month based on the designs they're creating for these avatars. So once again, we're in this digital space of fashion, right? Where we're able to be super exploratory and creative about what what users need. And you are getting consumer insight at the same time. In real time, you're really able to understand, what are people feeling? What are the trends that they're being drawn to? So that's my first example. And love a question. Oh yeah, sorry. Before you asked me a question, Aviv, one person in the chat said, how do you spell Roblox? Yes, you spelled it correctly. Rublox. Great. Any question from you, Aviv?
I have to first of all say that I'm going to touch on we're going to have some similarities in my next example, but cool. I love this because this is exactly the kinds of things that are important, because people might be thinking, all right, fashion, what does that have anything to do with creativity other than the pure design? And you're saying, no, there are so many aspects where that connects. Some of it connects to tech, like in your examples, and in general, we are taking this thing and practically half of your examples are pure play. I mean, there's also other aspects of it, but again, people are playing and getting value out of that. I love this. And how do you see this going on now that, for example, you gave the example of the escapism we need. How do you see this trending from now forward? Do you think that we're going to see a bunch of this, or do you think that this is going to go back to the way it was a few months ago?
So great question. What's a little interesting slash creepy is that these are businesses that launched 2 years ago, 1 year ago. As you notice in my examples, they first were starting off like the higher end brands who could afford to play in
Mm-hmm.
that space. They had the additional revenue and they had clients who were interested in playing in that space, right? Now that we've had proof of concept basically with these higher end brands, and given the times where people are restricted in movement through quarantine, online shopping is, exploding. To be able to democratize and make more widely available this type of technology so that people can understand what these garments may look like on their own avatars, adding in elements of play because of the how depressing the news is getting. I absolutely believe that this is going to just explode, and it's going to not only be the high-end luxe brands that will be doing this, but it will be the H&Ms and makeup cosmetics brands like Sephora. I should mention that back in, I'd say, the early 2000s, I learned about in Japan, retail already had a capability. Now, this wasn't online, this was walking into a store,
Mm-hmm.
but in the Japanese retail market, they were already exploring, this use of QR codes, right? You would go into a clothing boutique. Basically, they were doing in 2002, 2004, and 5 what we see like a couple of Nike stores doing sprinkled around the world, where they're basically using their stores as showrooms,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
This is 18 years ago. You'd walk into these select stores and boutiques in Tokyo, Japan. You'd see very little clothing on the floor. You would scan the garment. You would take a picture of yourself. Your picture would be transposed onto this scanned garment. You'd have a 3D virtual image of what it looked like. You would pick, if you liked it, you'd pick your size, and the garment would be shipped to you. So we were already seeing this kind of experimentation happening, and now it's just being kind of, in a way, being made more efficient because online platforms are much more widely used. People are not scared to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Remember back in the day, people were much more nervous about spending credit card money online, and
Yeah.
that's just not the case anymore. So my answer to your question is yes, I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Jane, hey Jane. Yes, you know about Threads. They did amazing children's teas. Great. Sheila is saying her small business is also made to order. Very smart. Yes, and now we know how to spell Roblox. Good. Any other questions with that example? All right. Well, if there's none, let's go on to your next example, your next
All
story,
right.
Aviv.
So my next story is not as interesting because it doesn't involve any wars and classified material, but it is about the other aspect of looking left and right, like we talked about. So first of all, you have to look left and right in order to play and realize, be aware of what your tools are capable of. And the second is that you want to have what I call product mastery, not just tech mastery, but product mastery, because you need to understand exactly your market, your users, what are you providing, why they like it. And as I said, this connects to your previous example because understanding exactly what the users want is where you can come up with innovation. Because did we have games before? Yes, we have, but now we are doing it in connection with fashion, and so on. So this is exactly another thing that is not purely, productive, getting my tasks from the to-do to done. We're investing in doing more things that provide us with more depth into the business. And I always say that, especially as the company grows and we become more and more distant from the end user because we have more and more roles and so on, you want to make sure that people are still aware of how things are working, and to invest and cultivate that product mastery. What I recommend is doing all sorts of things that would allow you to gain more and more perspective. For example, I always tell my clients they should try and have everyone shadow the customer support people like once a
Yes,
quarter and see what people are saying, how people are using things.
yes.
And I actually talked to a CEO last week who told me they had to do it right now because, you know, pandemic, and they have been bombarded with more and more support issues because they have a lot of volume, and so everyone have been rotating and seeing what's happening. And he said it's amazing, people are coming up with so many ideas about using that tool and changing that, and we need to explain this. And this is exactly what you get from the connection of product mastery. And if you can do it during a pandemic because you have to, imagine what you can get if you do it, you know, in a more organized and in a manner that allows you to do it exactly in the right way and in a way that allows everyone to understand what's going on. It starts from having, you know, the CEO, the real leadership that you talked about, the leadership up above, giving us all and trickling down the strategy and why we are doing things. You know, Simon Sinek, people care about why you do things, and trickles down all the way to understanding how sales are working, how the sausage is made, and so on. Even though it's not purely my work, all right, I have my hat of my specific department, but if you understand how things are going, you can come up with even more creativity, and that's the kind of thing that I love. I work with a startup who are amazing in that. They basically have no they are coders without borders. They do not care if
I love it.
something,
Coders without borders.
yeah, they don't care if something, you know, no, that's the QA people's, or that's something the product should be looking at. They don't have any of that. When there's an issue, if you're the one who right now is on call or is available, you're going to look into it and you're going to understand exactly how things work. And they are so connected to what their clients want, to what their customers want, and that actually is their differentiator. Everyone there knows exactly when they are given a task, when they should be digging deeper and doing more work because they know it's going to be used, and when they should be pushing back and saying, I think we can maybe, you know, this edge case, maybe we can put that aside and not invest into it because from what I know, there's no need for it, and so on. So they have, in Hebrew, we call these being a large head. In the army, you can be a small head or a large head. A small head, you tell him, can you check if my bottle is in that room? And he'll go and come back and say, yeah, your bottle is there, but you actually wanted him to bring up the bottle, right? So being a
Yeah,
large head is doing that, being proactive. And that's exactly what you get when you have this product mastery.
I love it. I advise my clients the same thing, Aviv, which the way I say differently, I say, get out of the friggin' building, right? If
Yeah.
you only rely on your survey data, even if you only rely on your focus groups, you are not going to get the sort of data and insight from your end users unless you shadow them. If you spend a morning, let alone a day with them, people lie. There's a big gap analysis between what I say versus what I do. So to your point, I also advise my clients to actually go to the user, follow them, observe, interview them. We can also get into a bit of the lying as well of interviews, but interviews are even better than the surveys. But
Mm-hmm.
really shadowing and doing deep observation is a gold mine for getting that product mastery that you're talking about. There was something else you said, Aviv, that I had a question about when you mentioned, when you were talking about scale, because the clients I work with are, some of them are really large corporations. And one of the reasons they hire me in the change management work is because things it gets very hard to change when you are so big. And your example of a company, of a client of yours that was better at it, you said it's a startup. You said they're coders without borders. So I really do think there is something to do with scale and size and your ability to be adaptive, to really be attuned into what the consumer needs. But maybe these examples we're showing, especially like the ones from fashion and using avatars, maybe that's one of the ways that perhaps that these bigger companies will get around that. But I don't think they should ever give up the human it should be yes and, right? It
Exactly.
should be using the avatars, using the tech, and going out onto the street. What do you think, Aviv?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that every time you have this extra friction between people and doing things that are not purely what you should be doing, in quotes, you're getting more and more a wider and wider perspective. You understand exactly what's going on. And it's like, when you're, say, there's no pandemic and you're flying on an airplane and you're sitting next to someone, who would you want to talk to? Someone that can only explain exactly what their role entails, or someone that actually has been talking to everyone else in every flight they had previously in their lives and can talk to you about many things and can connect the dots and tell you, oh, someone I know that does something that relates to what you just talked about, and you might want to talk to them. And this is in a different scale exactly what I want to see and work. I want to see people who understand what their colleagues are doing, even if they're in a different team, and even if I've never worked in marketing or whatever. I want you to understand at least and be connected so you can see how you might be helpful to them and where you might need to pull them and get help from them. All this
Mhm.
interdisciplinary work is where you get the real magic sauce.
Nice. I love it. We have a couple of good comments in the chat. And I messed up, guys. I'm sorry. I misspelled Roblox for you. It's Roblox, and I'm putting into the chat right now the correct. Does everyone see that?
Yeah.
Is that to everybody?
No, you
Okay.
send it just to panelists. You need to
Oh,
change it.
sorry, guys. Hang on. Here's Roblox. Excuse me.
All right.
And there we go. Okay, sorry about that. I think I misspelled it. So at least, Elisa, thank you for your question about Roblox. That is the link where you'll find out some more information. Someone else, Jamie, was talking about augmented reality, live video, shopping, Vogue. Yep, is already exploring that. And someone else had Bergdorf's, Bitmojis. Jamie shared a nice link around Bergdorf's and Bitmoji. Too bad Neiman's wasn't doing that, right, guys? Because Neiman's has filed for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
But speaking of Bitmojis, do you know much about cryptocurrency, Aviv?
I know the hype stuff.
You know enough to make you dangerous. You know cocktail party level.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, excuse me. That's something else. I don't know enough to really talk about. I didn't bring it up, but excuse me. That's another area that some fashion retailers are exploring. They're diving a bit into cryptocurrency as well. So that might be another example in terms of fashion and tech that we could talk about. Any other questions for Aviv, talking about product mastery and really talking to the consumer? Becky had a point. Do you want to read that,
Yeah.
Aviv?
I'm familiar with a battery company that sent engineers to spend time at retirement homes to see how people use hearing aid batteries. Oh, and that made them redesign the packaging as a result, of course, because they understood exactly how the users are using it. Yes, great example. This is exactly
And they
what I care
saved
about.
so much money because before they went and manufactured billions of these hearing aids and batteries, they actually understood how they needed to tweak the design. Great
Yeah.
example. Do you
Yeah.
know the name of that battery company, Becky? I'd love to know if you remember a little later. Okay.
Great.
All right. So let's. I'll share my last example. What I think is kind of cool is that Aviv and I are. There's a lot of parallels in our examples, which I think is a good sign. I think it shows some synchronicity into the world and the way the direction the businesses are thinking about moving. So my second and last story for today comes from something I heard on a podcast I really love. There's a podcast called Hello Monday, and it's hosted by Jessie Hempel. Excuse me, and and it's produced by LinkedIn. So it's a podcast that really explores the ways we work, why we work the way we work, etc. Well, this particular episode was all about the the gaming industry, the e-game industry. And my ears perked up for mainly initially because here in Philadelphia, I serve on the art commission. I'm a bureaucrat, I'm an art commissioner. And we have to review a lot of the permissions and permits and licenses that come up for public art and to do refurbishing of things. And it's a really interesting way to engage with the city of Philadelphia. Well, one of the things that came our way as part of some of the public hearings is that Philadelphia, I'm sure that it's been halted right now because of everything that's going on, but is in the process of building I think the second largest, if maybe not the largest, e-gaming stadium in the United States. And they were looking at the model from, I believe, Seoul, South Korea. And so I was just fascinated by this testimony from the developers, from some of the e-gaming experts, because it was just something so foreign to me. Here you have this humongous space with this tremendous amount of digital equipment, where you have in the pit, you have these gamers who are like hunched over and they're doing their code and they're doing their gaming stuff. And you have around the stadium thousands of people who have teams, right? They have their branded colors, and it's like this whole world that I've been completely ignorant about. So anyway, fast forward. Yeah, it's amazing, right? And so I'm like, yay, Philly. So anyway, I'm in my car driving. I'm listening to a podcast, which is where I used to like listen to podcasts before COVID-19, and listening to Hello Monday. And they're talking about esports. I'm like, oh, cool. I just heard a testimony about that. But what really caught my ear is as the person interviewed said, guess what the number one job skill of growth is going to be in esports? And you think coding, something traditionally techie related. No, the top 3 growing job skills for esports, and esports, by the way, is the largest sport in the world right now, and it's only going to get bigger. It used to be football, soccer, right? Now it's esports. The 3 highest growing job skills are the need for writers, visual artists, and get this, physical therapists. So let me talk about the physical therapists first. Physical therapists, because these folks are like hunched over all the time and they're like crouched and their blood circulation is horrible. And they actually need people to stretch their bodies and get their blood flow going and all that stuff. So that was interesting. But it was the writers and the visual artists that I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because when you think about it, what is driving esports and e-games? It's story. It's storytelling. It's the ability to master the arc of the story, the climax, the hero's journey, the conflict, the tension. How do you get beyond it? Who are the villains? Who are the good people? Who's the underdog, right? And this requires really skilled people who studied English and literature and who are writers and who really work at writing. So that was really awesome. And then visual artists, because you have to be able to visually tell whoever the code, whatever logic the coders have mapped out for the game. It has to be visually accessible and understandable. So painters, illustrators are also going to be really higher in demand. So I thought I'd have to share this example for our conversation today. So when we think about creativity and technology, it's this background and the skill set in things like writing and in visual art, illustration, which goes hand in hand with the largest tech-based sports in the world, e-games and esports. So that's my final example.
Wow, I'm still imagining the concept of having a stadium of a bunch of people watching other people using their computer or their PlayStation or whatever. It's mind-boggling. But specifically what you just said, your last example of people working in having more people working on the stories, this is people who are creatives, right? That's the title of the job. And how do you see that connecting in a world that is so, when I work with techies, and I allow myself to say it because I'm a techie, all right, I'm coding since I was 9. So most of us are so, we're very much straight to the point. Thinking about creative ideas is trouble, and many coders I know hate have a love hate relationship even with, with the designer if we're working on a simple web app, because the designer has their concept of how things should be looking, and they care about the animations and how things move. And I'm guessing that in games it's like five times harder, or 5,000 times harder. So how do you see that connection, and how can you make the bond better, do you think?
Make the bond better between the techie and the creatives. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, hopefully actually doing a little bit of what we were just talking about in your example just a minute ago about the need to get out of the building to communicate with the end user. There has to be closer communication throughout the process, instead of it being what we used to call when those of us who worked in design thinking, a lot of the time I get brought in to help clients is to help eliminate silos, work silos, right? To help
Hmm.
build collaboration in teams and eliminate this throwing it over the wall, right? So the engineer builds something, they throw it over the wall to the designer makes it pretty, they throw it over the wall to the sales and marketing team. That is
Hmm.
the old way of working. That you can't work that way anymore. It's not efficient, right? It's
Yeah.
totally inefficient, which lowers productivity and increases cost. So um, one of the things that has to happen is we have to get rid of our myths about each other, right? The myths that I have about techies and what they care about, what they don't care about, the myths that techies have about creatives. We got to get each other in a room. We have to have conversations, and we have to think through things collaboratively from the beginning, because there may be something that the storyteller is working through that will help the coder figure out, oh, okay, if that's really where you're thinking this is going to end, what if we offered these sorts of options, right? And then
Yeah.
that might spark a new idea for the story building, for the illustrator, etc. So for me, it really comes down to communication, communicating early and often, getting out of our separate rooms into one big collective room.
Yeah, thank you. I get that. And now that you're saying it, I'm having flashbacks of, the best kinds of, for example, mobile developers I've worked with, people working on true apps. Those people usually, when they work with the designers, they didn't just code whatever the designer said. The best ones provided the designers with tools. They actually coded some tools for them, so the designer could tinker and say, oh, let's see if I change the color, if I move the button a bit. And the designer usually can't code everything from scratch, but providing them with some tools all of a sudden provides them with the ability to think of more things, and then they truly can collaborate. So yeah, I agree, this is exactly the way to go.
There's that word tinker again. And when I many years ago, I worked in the fashion industry in global sourcing, and I lived and worked in Sri Lanka and in Portugal, and I would travel throughout Asia visiting.
Mossad, yes.
Yes, uh, visiting fabric mills and factories. And the most exciting moments were when designers were working with engineers at a yarn mill and hacking new ways to do the yarn twist so that the hand of the fabric would come out a certain way, that if the designer and the engineer weren't together having that conversation at that moment in time, they have it later, it's conflict sometimes, and there's a lot of money involved. But there was such a beautiful example how they're both uber creative, right? And
Yeah.
they just actually sparked more ingenuity by talking together. So yeah, we have a couple of points from the chat room. Becky's going to email us the example of the battery company, part of Everready. Awesome. Elisa thought it was a fascinating example maybe Roblox or something, maybe the e-games we were talking about.
E-games, yeah.
E-games. Thanks, Elisa. And then,
Sherry is agreeing, I see, yeah.
yeah, it's really, yes, thank you. Awesome. Okay, well, we're coming at the end of our time. Do you guys and who joined us today, do you have any questions, any points that you'd like to share before we end? We have a couple of call to actions before we end our hour together. Can we speak to collaborating online using tech like whiteboards? So, Zoom actually has a whiteboard function. Has anyone ever used, can we do a hand share? Can we do share? No, I don't think we can do.
Raise a hand? Yeah, we can do that.
Has anyone ever used the whiteboard function on Zoom? Anybody?
I'm seeing one hand go up.
Okay, so when you do the share, when you go to share screen on Zoom and you get to that white background and all those like monitor windows, one of the options is a whiteboard option. And, I have limited experience using that, but that's something. There's also Becky and Aviv and I have tried we have a mastermind group that we're all part of, and we've tried using the
Mural, I think.
Mural. There's also one called Mural. Mural is a good one. I like Mural is kind of the post-it type of idea. Sometimes I find that, like, I led for a client a 3-hour design thinking workshop last month, and they said, "Oh, do you want to use something like Mural to get people to share ideas?" And I actually said, "No. You know what we used? We used paper, and we used a pen, and that level of technology was fine in that case, because for me, I had a limited amount of time with them, and I didn't want to get sidetracked with, wait, how do I move the post-it? Wait, where's my post-it? Where is everybody? I didn't want to get into all that. I think that when we can work with each other with dedicated amount of time to really learn the tool and have a bit more comfort with, and then really dig into it, but don't just kind of throw at it like willy-nilly. You do need to spend some time to get comfortable and work that new muscle. Anything you can master with time, but you do need to spend the time.
Yeah, I do think that the whiteboards need some work and it needs some getting used to. I agree, but I do think that in some situations they can be beneficial, especially if you have a long discussion. There's one thing I hate, and that is when you're talking to a coder, you can see them nodding as if they're listening, but you can hear the keyboard clicking, and then you know that they're actually coding. They're just nodding every 10 seconds or so, so you can feel like people are in the conversation. And I see people doing that with emails and so on. When we meet in the same room, I always say laptops closed, but when you're doing things remotely, it's kind of hard because they need to have the laptop open. And if you have something like a whiteboarding tool like Mural or Miro, or you can even use Google Docs where people can share and edit together. That keeps people on their toes because they see something and they can add to it, and they can see that Natalie's editing this and I'm right next to her and adding something
in real time.
Yeah. And there's another thing I kind of like, and it's not about purely collaboration, but a new tool that I've been really interested about because of the pandemic, of course, is it's called Online Town. And that is, we all know the happy hours that we are used to having in an office. And now many companies are simply trying to do that online in Zoom, but that's not even remotely the same, because in Zoom we have one conversation. We cannot have multiple conversations going on. Where in the office, I'd go to the side and talk to Natalie, and someone else would go there, and we might be switching and so on. And Online Town has this geography kind of feature to it, so that the closer I choose to drag myself in the virtual room, I can hear the other conversations going around, and people can see that I'm approaching them. So it kind of gives you interesting collaboration for different kinds of meetings. So I like that.
That's cool. Online Town. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sherry just had a comment. Love the example that paper and pens to hold a place, which also allows the audience to be involved. stimulating thought through writing, which leads to maybe in the future technology integrating what actual hands-on experiences do. Yes, highly likely. All right, so we're going to end, and one of our calls to action is that if you would be interested in getting a sneak peek of the Creativity Leap, please go visit figure8thinking.com. And right when you get to the website, that's FIGURE, the number 8thinking.com, you'll see at the top an opportunity to click on that banner, and you'll can start getting the Ever Wonder newsletter, and you can get a sample chapter of the Creativity Leap. And plus, I'd love to hear from you. So definitely check that out. Aviv?
Yeah, and you'll get later, probably tomorrow, you get an email with a link to the recording, so you can watch this later if you want it. And we'll have a link to Natalie's sample chapter, so you can get that as well. And if you want to chat with me, I'm open to it. Just reply to my email and let me know. And I also have a newsletter called Change Catalyst if you are into creating high impact driven engineering organizations. So thank you for joining us, Natalie. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Pleasure to chat with you, Aviv. Thanks for your great examples. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.